All right, I think this thing started as a meteor shower thought, but it's kind of turned into a standalone pet peeve of mine, and it's come up several times in my recent conversations with my fellow Christians. It seems obvious to me, but not obvious to everybody else, so maybe you can show me where I'm misunderstanding this thing. In the dead horse that is the superior morality of Christianity, my Christian friends keep referencing things like the Golden Rule and the Ten Commandments. I don't get it. I don't understand why we think that the Ten Commandments goes in the same bin as the Golden Rule. We don't need to muddle the many great teachings in the Gospels with this terrible can of worms that is the Ten Commandments. I don't think Christians know anything about the Ten Commandments. Or maybe I don't, so I'm going to tell you what I know and then fix it for me if you would. The Ten Commandments start in Exodus 20, but as Jordan Peterson taught us, it doesn't really start in Exodus 20.
They really try to make Moses into a new Pharaoh, and so they set him up as judge. And so they bring all the disputes they can't reconcile themselves to his attention and ask him to rule. And Moses' father-in-law comes along, a man named Jethro.
We need to go back first to Exodus 18, where Jethro visits Moses. Moses had been acting as the judge of Israel and mediating all of the conflicts of the people. His father-in-law, Jethro, sees that he's about to have a nervous breakdown, and he steps in to say, hey, why don't you divvy up some of this work so it's not all yours? Perhaps this feels a little bit like retirement to Moses, and so while on one hand it sounds like a great idea, on the other hand, it means you're retiring and maybe nobody needs you or cares about you anymore. The thing that has been consuming your life and that you've dumped all of your passion into, that was all perhaps an unnecessary sacrifice, and for most people, that's an unacceptable proposition. Most people in retirement don't realize that until after they're retired, and they feel like, oh no, what's the point of my life now? I don't know if Moses could see this coming or not, but at about the point where his relationship with God and its governance over all of Israel is no longer necessary, and Moses is going to have to rely on the judgment of multiple other people instead of him being in charge of all of it, that's when we get to the end of chapter 18, where it says, then Moses sent his father-in-law on his way, and Jethro returned to his own country. Yes, this is about the Ten Commandments. We go on to Exodus 19. Moses goes up to God, and God says what every person about to go into retirement would want God to say. And that is, don't let them do this their own way, the way you've been doing it your own way. No, your way was the right way, and if they're going to do it the right way, they need to follow your playbook. Our playbook, my playbook. You've been following my playbook. Now you need to give them my playbook. It will come through you. I'm not saying that Moses made all of this up. The question of the actual existence of Moses and the actual exodus of the Israelites is an entirely other subject. I'm just saying that either by design or by coincidence in this story, this is the context for the Ten Commandments. Let's read together. That sounded pastoral. In verse 3, God says to Moses, hey, I'm going to talk to you and it's going to be really super important. So Moses tells the people, and then the people say, we will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses goes back and tells God, don't worry, whatever you say, they're going to do that. And says to the man who's retiring, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. That's interesting. It must have felt very good. And then there's a lot of preparation here. They got to wash themselves so they're all ready. And then you got to put limits around the people. And the people cannot approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. So not only put to death, but specifically stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. So do it remotely. I'm not sure why, but Moses is going to talk to God and no one else can be around. It's just the two guys who've been in charge of everything up until this point, and one of the guys is about to go into retirement. We're about to dissolve that whole system, but one last time. This is like Mission Impossible number 13 or 14 or whatever the last one is. Oh no, you thought that was the last one. This is the last one. I promise, this context is important for understanding what the Ten Commandments are and why we don't want to use it. I mean, there are a lot of reasons. For one, you could just say the words New Covenant and then talk about Jesus. Second of all, you don't even know what the Ten Commandments are. Can you list them all right now? You can't. You got like 3 of them right. And then all the atheists are like,
you co-sponsored a bill requiring the display of the Ten Commandments in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Mm-hmm. What are the Ten Commandments?
Don't murder, don't lie, don't steal. I can't name them all.
Congressman, thank you for taking time away from keeping the Sabbath day holy to talk to me.
Anytime, Stephen.
So not only do you want to not point at the Old Covenant and you don't know what the Old Covenant says, the context of the Old Covenant is really problematic. And I'm trying to show you why. So here we go. We can finally get to Exodus chapter 20. And we finally get to try to pass the test, which you didn't. It says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. That's not really a commandment. So here's our first one. You shall have no other gods before me. Hopefully you got at least that one right, because when the Pharisees asked Jesus, what are the two most important commandments? He says, love the Lord your God only. And then the second one is like it, which is love your neighbor as yourself. Now, that's tricky because that's not actually the second commandment, because he was talking about a different set of commandments, which is part of the problem. But at least hopefully you get the first one right. Number one is God is number one. And it's weird. You don't want to point to this one because it brings up the idea of other gods. In fact, in just a second, we're about to encounter the golden calf, which is a god that they build. If the Israelites don't have good reason to believe that this other god is as real and as effective as their God, when they've got all this proof of the real God and zero proof of this other God, why would they start worshiping this other God after like a month of not hearing from the God who doesn't talk sometimes for thousands of years? The Christian mindset says, yeah, sometimes we're just really fickle like that. But all of the non-Christian brains, they look at the fights of the gods of the Old Testament as perhaps proof that maybe some of these other gods have just as much credibility as the God of the Israelites. We want the first commandment to just be put God first. We do not want to draw attention to other gods, other miracles, other competitors to God. Fortunately, I don't think most people think that deeply about it, so it's not a problem for most people. Okay, let's try to do 2 through 9 a little bit faster. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. Again, we wanted to say just don't make idols. Instead, it says no paintings, no images that would be admired. Why? Because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. I punish the children for the sins of their parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. Again, this is all old covenant stuff. You don't want the actual list. Not to mention, this is not the actual list. And I understand there are interpretations for all of this stuff. We're going to frame jealousy in a good light, and we're punishing a child for the sins of their parents. It sounds bad, but we can massage it. If you really interpret the right translation the right way, you'll understand it's not nearly as bad as it seems like it would be if you read it in English. But this is my point. You don't want to read it in English. Okay, seriously trying to speed up here. Don't misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. For all the people who are like, the golden rule and the 10 commandments, are these two things that you really want to put together? God loves you all and wants you all to treat each other with love. And also, if you misuse his name, he will not hold you guiltless. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm saying it's not the thing you want to point to. For a lot of reasons. We'll keep on moving. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Do you? I know it's okay if you reinterpret it, but you have to reinterpret it. Not to mention the subtext is talking a lot about slaves. And then it's going to push you real hard in like the earth is only 6,000 years old direction for the justification of it. It's fine. We'll keep moving. Honor your father and your mother so you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Fine. You shall not murder. This is the one you got right. Also, though, this is the one that the atheists also agree with. Most of the psychopaths agree it's a pretty good rule. Most of the non-human apes also agree, like, boo, murder within your tribe. Yay, murder if it's outside of your tribe. But also, that's kind of what God says too. Only when it's necessary, which is also what the other apes say. So this is a good one. Not in any way revolutionary. It's not even really human, much less it's like superhuman. But it's fine. You shall not commit adultery. This is also one we don't want to look at, especially if you're looking at the biblical definition of adultery, especially if you are either divorced or a dude. And most of us fit into one of those two categories. We're almost done, but again, we haven't yet looked at the 10 commandments. This is just the Mandela effect commandments. This is what you think that you remember reading about the 10 commandments. Moving on, don't steal. This is right up there with don't murder. Most of the primates are already doing this one. I mean, you can steal, but then your reputation is going to be tarnished. So just from a practical level, don't steal is up there with don't murder. Barely a human commandment. Finishing off, don't give false testimony about your neighbor. Sometimes this one is known as don't lie, but it doesn't actually say that. It says don't give false testimony. But for these not 10 commandments, I think our summaries are usually better. What we wish they said, like put God first and don't make idols and don't lie. These are better rules than what the 10 commandments give us, which is a hard thing to admit when you're trying to say that the 10 commandments are the best rules we could have. We accidentally made them better just by misremembering them. I don't think this should be a problem for Christians. This is all old covenant. Just say the words new covenant. But it gets worse. The next one we misremember as don't covet your neighbor's wife. That's not what it says. It starts with your neighbor's house. And then it says your neighbor's wife. And then it says they're slaves and does not make a footnote about, by the way, don't do slaves.
That's what she said.
Or his ox or donkey. Or anything that belongs to your neighbor, like his wife or his slaves. This is the good version of the Ten Commandments that is not yet the Ten Commandments, and you don't want to point atheists to reading this stuff. They're going to read it and misunderstand it by thinking that it means what it says. So we got our list of 10, we're done, right? Wrong. Because in verse 21, the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, so we're still doing the Ten Commandments thing. Tell the Israelites this, you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold. And then build me an altar, and do not go up to my altar on the steps, or your private parts may be exposed. So we're still in Ten Commandments territory. We're still in the misremembering of the Ten Commandments territory. Verse chapter 21, God says, these are the laws that you are to set before them. Okay, so we're still doing the 10 Commandments. If we go back to chapter 20, we count them up, we realize that we actually have way more than 10. Now you could summarize them into 10, and the heading that's added in long after the book is written and the chapters and verses are put in, it says the 10 Commandments. But if I didn't know there was supposed to be 10 going into it and I was just asked to number them, I'd probably break this one up into a couple different commandments. Keeping the Sabbath day holy isn't necessarily the same thing as not working. I don't know, maybe you think it is. I would definitely split this one up. Don't cover your neighbor's house. That's a commandment. Don't cover your neighbor's wife. That's a commandment. Unless we put this at the beginning, don't covet anything that belongs to your neighbor, and then you split it out. And then towards the end here, we also have some other commands. I don't know the difference between a command and a commandment, but I end up with way more than 10 if I'm the one counting and I'm not told ahead of time that it's supposed to be 10. I'm sorry if that's sacrilegious for you, but you're really going to hate chapter 21 because the Israelites still haven't seen the 10 commandments yet, and now we're about to get a whole lot more. Here are commandments about what to do with your Hebrew servants. These are servants, sometimes known as slaves. Servants sounds better. I say we go with servants, who are Hebrews, who are Israelites. This is like Americans who are enslaving other Americans. I'm sorry, they're not our slaves. They're our servants, unpaid servants that we own. If you think that's a misrepresentation, I welcome you to read those verses. But I should point out, there are lots of commandments in here, maybe 10 in that section alone. Then we deal with personal injuries. God breaks out that word murder a little bit more here so it's clear what to do if it's an accidental death instead of an intentional death. These are all still part of the 10 Commandments. And there's a lot of putting to death in here. I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm saying this is not the thing that you want to point to. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. Anyone who schemes and kills someone deliberately, that person is to be taken from my altar and put to death. Attack your father or mother, put to death. Kidnapping, put to death. Curse your father or mother, put to death. Beat your slaves, not put to death. Actually, in this case, if all you did was beat your slave and they don't die within the next day or two, that's forgivable since the slave is their property. And if they do die, well, then that person should probably be punished appropriately. We're not going to put them all to death. Reminder, we're still in the 10 Commandments. All right, so to be fair, I keep saying these are still the 10 Commandments, and all the biblical scholars are probably thinking,
I don't think it means what you think it means.
All these chapters are not the 10 Commandments. I get it. It's just an arbitrary title, at least in the context of Exodus 20. I think that perhaps Jewish culture even holds that these original are like the 10 Commandments, and all the other things that follow are known as the Covenant Code or the Book of the Covenant. That's cool. It's their book. That's allowed. Also, as I'm reading, I don't see that distinction. And I don't think that God would have much mercy on a person that was like, well, Lord, I kept the 10 Commandments, but I broke all of the Book of the Covenant because obviously that was an appendix to the Big 10. I think God meant all of the commandments with the same amount of vigor because he prescribes death for breaking most of the parts. So if God doesn't think there's a top 10, I don't know why we would say that there is a top 10. But more importantly, and this is my main point, I don't think that when we're talking to atheists about the superior morality of Christianity and how you can't have morality apart from God, I don't think we should send them to the middle of Exodus unsupervised. The number of the commandments that they would find there is not the problem. It's the contents, and I don't think that in all of those chapters we could probably pull out 10 of them that are like, here's the proof that there's no morality without this God. That might be true. The proof is not there. And commandment like 37 of the 10 Commandments says that if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman, she gives birth prematurely, but if there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life. The abortion that happened does not count as a life. According to this, not me, I think it is a life. I'm just saying that the 10 Commandments say that if the woman dies, it's life for life. If the baby dies, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. Okay, before you get too mad, you should know this fits perfectly within the Christian church's theological history of ensoulment. That is, when a baby gets its soul. Now, this episode is all about the 10 Commandments, so if you want to talk to me about abortion and ensoulment, then go discuss that with me on that video. Spoiler alert, I'm more anti-abortion than you are. Okay, still in the 10 Commandments. We got a lot more stuff on that. And then we move on to Exodus 22, where finally the 10 Commandments end. Right? Wrong. Commandment 76 of the 10 Commandments. We have this section about protection of property, and then we have this section about social responsibility. Here we see that if a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged to be married and sleeps with her, he must be put to death. Kidding. He must pay the bride price, and she shall be his wife. So like all of those old like Levitical commandments that all of the Christian apologists hate, and they're like, atheists, don't bring that stuff up. That's all the old covenant. That's all the 10 Commandments. We're not in Leviticus. We're in Exodus. We're sitting with Moses on Mount Sinai, getting the 10 Commandments that we are for some reason putting up there with Jesus' forgiveness and the golden rule. We're not even to the worst part yet. Sorceress, put to death. Intimate relations with an animal, put to death. And frankly, this is the one that is most disappointing to me. Because if you do this to a woman, then you own her and she becomes your wife. By that logic, if you do this to an animal, it should become part of your cattle. You should be forced to pay the cattle price, and now it becomes your cattle. Okay, so in editing this, I can see how I backed myself into a world of hurt here.
That's what she said.
I oppose this act for the same reason that I oppose marrying children at the age that the Bible condones. Those beings are not capable of consenting to that. The part that I am, quote, disappointed about, of course, is that this word directly from God on Mount Sinai seems to make assaulting an animal a worse offense than assaulting a woman. That's disappointing. I can see how what I said might come across as questionable, even though that's not what I meant. So I jumped in here to fix it. It seems like if God could have seen that this would have come across the wrong way, he could have jumped in and fixed that. He did not. I'm disappointed, because now it's hard for me to point my non-Christian friends to this part of the Bible. Furthermore, I'm also disappointed that it seems like this instruction makes it so that the woman is subjected to more of the same. With the animal, it can go on and live a productive, meaningful life. It's not somehow spoiled forever because of what one man did to it once. For a woman, well, at least in the Christian culture that I grew up in the 90s, that was kind of a gray area. For more on that topic, check out my other episodes or just search for the words Christian chewed gum. Sacrifice to any other god other than the Lord, put to death. And then we got a lot of verses here that are actually really quite nice in comparison to the earlier verses. This whole section right here seems like a breath of fresh air to all of the panicking Christians who've been reading through and being like, wait, but no, you don't understand. Unfortunately, these best parts of the 10 Commandments are so unrevolutionary that if you just read them out of context, you'd be like, meh, okay, cool. And then towards the end of the chapter, it says, give me all your firstborn sons. And arguably, that might not mean sacrifice them to me. It does say do the same with your cattle and sheep. Let them stay with their mothers for the first 7 days, but then give them to me on the 8th day. Read your commentaries, interpret it. Don't point atheists to this as the great morality of Christianity. Chapter 23, laws of justice and mercy. Some really good stuff in there, some really troubling stuff. Sabbath laws. We're still in the, 227th commandment of the 10 commandments that the Israelites still have not seen. The last one here is do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. That's part of the 10 commandments. And then God gives a speech here at the end in which he promises to bless the slaughtering and conquest of other people in their land. I'm not saying that's the correct interpretation of it. I'm saying that is what it seems to say. Exodus 24, interesting. Read it. It's not pertinent to our discussion of the 10 commandments. Same for chapter 25. Chapter 26, definitely more boring. Chapter 27, we still haven't gotten the 10 commandments yet. 28, 29, chapter 30. We get all the way to chapter 32, and if you think you were bored, then the Israelites understand. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come make us gods who will go before us. And Aaron answered them, what do you mean another god? There's only one true God, for there's only one God who's ever proven anything at all. No, I'm kidding. Aaron immediately thought it was a good idea. Now, either he and they were all so forgetful that this story is just boring. Like, Superman became uninteresting when we realized that he was too powerful to have any actual foes. So we had to introduce kryptonite in order to make the story readable. And we all know the stormtroopers are like the worst shots in the world. We want something a little bit more real. And if there's only one true God who can do everything, and then all the other fake gods that can do nothing, the only context in which it makes sense that these people here who follow the one true God would think that a calf that they had made out of gold was as powerful as the real God, well, that's only an interesting story in a context where there's a belief that there are other gods. And they duke it out with like this other God. I mean, I thought this even as a small child. I'm going to abandon that whole topic because this is supposed to be about the 10 Commandments. So the Lord says to Moses, go down because your people, whom you brought out of Egypt, have become corrupt. It's interesting to me that God gives Moses the credit for that here. That must have felt very good. They've been quick to turn away from what I commanded them. And here we have a problem. If we're going to say that our moral compass is the 10 commandments that God gave us, and God has not yet delivered to them the commandment that says don't follow other gods, why is he saying that they've been quick to turn away from what I commanded them? You haven't told them yet to not make other graven images, and now you're mad at them for casting an idol in the shape of a calf. All right, I was just simply wrong about this. If we go to Exodus 24, which is one of the chapters I skipped over with you, it says, the Lord said to Moses, come up to the Lord, and you and Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, you are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord, and others must not come near, and the people may not come up with him. And then I was like, oh, okay, cool, he's still on the mountain. Unfortunately, the next verse says, when Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said, we will do. Verse 4 is, Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. Now, having written a couple books, I run into this in my writing sometimes where I'll be proofreading and then I'll realize, oh, I went in and interjected something here, and so these parts don't quite really go together. And then I have to like go back and make sure it's more consistent. But doing my best to make sense of this perfect, inerrant word of God, I'm going to say that he was up on the mountain, and then he came down and he said the stuff to the people, like at a boundary or something. Like he came down and he was like, hey, by the way, this is what the Lord says, and then recited from memory all of those chapters. And then after they were like, we'll do it, then Moses wrote down everything that the Lord had said, all the 10 commandments in all those chapters. And then he like travels down the mountain and he's like doing like sacrifices and stuff with them. He took the blood and put it in bowls. He splashed some of it on the altar. And then he took this thing, the Book of the Covenant, and read it to the people. That was him, I'm assuming, what he wrote down, everything that the Lord had said. And then they responded once again, yeah, we already said we will do everything the Lord has said. So they like, I don't know, it's like a Groundhog Day thing here. And then after they do this, the bloody part of it, then the Lord says to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commandments I have written for their instruction. And Moses was like, oh, thanks, but I kind of already wrote it down because I thought that was going to be important. But it's God. You're not going to say that to God. So you're like, okay, thanks. That would be great. Like when God gives you an Instapot for Christmas because he doesn't know that you already have one. And so you like try to make sure that he doesn't go in the pantry to see that you already have one because you're like, oh, thanks. This is the best. I've heard great things. And seriously, if you think that I'm making fun of this, I don't feel like I am. If you can make more sense of this, if you can rewrite it, I would appreciate it. The way that God wrote it or that the interpreters interpreted it, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But I do think it's fair to say that at this point, they have heard all of the previous 10 commandments that were given and all of the stuff that was in all of those chapters. According to this account, they heard it not only once, but then they heard it twice, and then God called Moses up on the mountain to get another copy of it. So presumably they're going to hear it at least a third or maybe a fourth time too. So 2 points here, I guess. One is these are not the 10 commandments that the Israelites will eventually walk away with. That's a different set that's coming. But more importantly, the second point is when we pastors tell you, skip over this part, let me summarize it for you, maybe just go back and read that section anyway. And I think that's because he made it clear in other places earlier. And also it's just obvious. If you're in a relationship with a person or with a god, especially if you know them to be temperamental and jealous, then you always put them first and you never ever carry on another relationship with another idol, lest they get mad and try to smite you. You don't need the 10 commandments to tell you that. And that's the argument that the atheists are usually making when the Christians point to the Ten Commandments and say, but without the Ten Commandments, how will you know that you're not supposed to put other people first? You're not supposed to kill each other. How are you supposed to know that you're not supposed to steal their stuff, like their slaves or their wives or other things that they own? It's still not as bad as it's going to get, though. God says, now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and I may destroy them. I wasn't exaggerating about the smiting thing. Then I will make you into a great nation. And this must have felt very good for Moses. But Moses was a really good person. And he's like, hey, God, why not just chill out a little bit? Why don't you just take a few deep breaths and I'll go talk to him? Which is what a person who is going into retirement might want others to think about him. Like, hey, look at all this great stuff that I did for you, and if it weren't for me, things would be a lot worse. As it turns out, God says to do all the stuff that I've been telling you to do all along. And even now, without me, it's going to go badly for you. But it's in the Bible. Apparently, that's what actually happened. I'm just saying that must have felt very good for Moses. So Moses talks God off the ledge, and then he turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant laws in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. Yeah, they must have been. Because even on paper, that many chapters is going to take up a few pages. Okay, so to be fair, arguably these entire chapters were not on the tablets. Some verses indicate that it wasn't actually the 10 Commandments either, but merely 10 words. In that case, I feel like God should sharpen his chisel or something, because you could fit those probably on one tablet. But much like every single scrap of original writing in the Bible, God has found it unnecessary to preserve any part of these tablets for us. So we can't compare it to our copies of the writings. And you and I are supposed to just accept that we're ridiculous, or maybe some sort of evil, for ever thinking that having that would in any way be beneficial to us. You and I are told that even if you did have that, you still would have your questions and you still wouldn't believe. God doesn't give you proof because he knows it's pointless and he knows you're helpless. You'll believe when you want to believe. Actually, that part is probably right. But beliefs aside, I'm terribly curious what was actually on those tablets. And I don't know how to counter the people that claim that there's zero evidence that they, or the person Moses, or the enslavement in Egypt, or the Exodus ever actually happened. I'm open to being wrong about this, but I really feel like if God had supernaturally preserved the tablets, it might have helped there. I think a lot of people agree with that, but most people don't want to be called evil by their community, so most people just don't say that out loud. But God's got real small handwriting, and the tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God. He's the one that engraved the tablets. If you were raised as good a Christian as I was, then you know what happens next. Moses comes down from the mountain and sees the people worshiping the idol, and he gets angry and throws the 2 tablets that have all of the 10 commandments on them out of his hands, breaking them into pieces at the foot of the mountain. In case you haven't read it, I want to read you this part because it's kind of fun. "Don't be angry, my lord," Aaron answered. "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said, 'Make us a god,' and I told them, 'Well, if you have any gold jewelry, take it off.' And I was not going to make them an idol, but they gave me the gold and I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf." And Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control, and he realized these people are not going to make it without me. And that must have felt very good for Moses. And the next day Moses went to the people and said, "You've committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make an atonement for your sin. Last time I talked to the guy, he was pretty moody, and he said he wanted to slaughter you, but I'll see what I can do for you. It's a good thing I'm not in retirement yet." And this must have felt very depressing and weighty and very purposeful for Moses. And in chapter 33, he goes back up and has another meeting with God. This is pointed to as the most meaningful meeting that anyone has ever had with God in the history of humanity. And in chapter 34, we finally get the new stone tablets. These are finally the 10 Commandments. Did you have the 10 Commandments memorized? We're about to find out. The Lord said to Moses, "This time you're going to chisel out the 2 stone tablets like the first ones. And I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. We're going to do that in the morning. Come back." So on stone with a chisel, he does perhaps all of those chapters word for word, or some summary of it. Nope, it can't be a summary. It says, "I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke." Wait, who's doing the chiseling here? Moses is chiseling out the 2 stone tablets. The words are going to be written by God. So Moses did not write the second set. Early in the morning, he was carrying 2 blank stone tablets. And so finally, here, God is going to give Moses what can only be described as commandments. For he says in verse 11, "Obey what I command you today." If I was numbering them, I would put this as number 1. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land where you are going. This next one is maybe commandment number 2. Maybe it's part of the first one. Break down their altars and smash their sacred stones. Do not worship any other god, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. God's mother was not creative in naming him, apparently. But that does sound like the first commandment from the first set. So number 1 is still like God is number 1. Now, if I was just coming to these verses on my own, I would have no reason to want to harmonize these 2 sets of commandments together. But if we're going to pretend like the 10 commandments are a thing and that they number 10, I guess we can align these 2. Like, just put God number 1. He said it in different words, but it still means God's number 1. That's rule number 1. In this case, it means don't make any treaties with those who live in the land where you're going. So, we got it. Rule number 1, we got that one correct. I'm going to try to group these all in with number 1, and then we can maybe get number 2, which aligns with number 2 on the other set. Don't make any idols. And then we're going to go off the rails. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. That apparently is commandment number 3. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. Do you even have that on your bingo card? Rule number 4 is the first offspring of every womb belongs to me. The way you're going to redeem a firstborn donkey is with a lamb, but if you do not redeem it, you have to break its neck. And then it just says, redeem all your firstborn sons. I guess really don't forget the lamb. And then it says, no one is to appear before me empty-handed. I don't know if that's number 5 or if that's still number 4. Does that go with the first offspring of every womb belongs to me? I don't know. Let's call that all number 4. And then number 5 then would be 6 days you shall labor, but on the 7th you shall rest. That sounds familiar to something in the first set of 10 that was like 300 long. And then maybe number 6 is celebrate the festival of weeks with the first fruits of wheat harvest. I wish he would have put the commandments of the festivals all together. It'd be easier to remember that way. Or maybe he intended that as a footnote to the other festival thing. I don't know. I'm having a real hard time lining these quote-unquote 10 up. Then do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast. So like when we're talking about morality with atheists, then we're going to point to like, well, we have the golden rule, and look how Jesus forgave people of their sins. And also look at the amazing morality of do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast. I understand. The golden rule was your first best evidence. This was not your second best evidence. Bring the best of the first fruits of the soil to the house of the Lord your God. So maybe all of this here, maybe all of that's one commandment, like the Sabbath and the donkeys and the breaking of the necks and the yeast. Maybe that's all one together. I don't know. He does end with do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So whatever else you want to say about the 10 commandments, it seems like that one is like most important, at least to end with. God thinks like number 1 is keep God number 1 and do whatever you want in the middle. But at the end, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. And Moses was there with the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights without eating bread or drinking water. That's interesting. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, and this is the part that makes me think that I just don't understand this thing properly, because he writes the 10 commandments. So apparently, whoever authored this book, who I learned in seminary was Moses, and then I learned during seminary wasn't Moses, but whoever wrote this, I don't know, maybe it was Moses, I don't really care. They counted these things up, and they came up with 10 commandments. Now, this most recent list, this looks like 10, and so maybe Moses counted up this list, which I could turn into 10, and he was like, this is 10 commandments. And that's why that's all that Moses wrote was the words, the 10 commandments. God wrote everything else. And the first tablets didn't like have any fancy heading. So if there is a 10 commandments, the author of Exodus and Moses, and maybe those are the same person, agree that these are the 10 commandments. And I don't think these really strike a person emotionally as like really moving examples of the superior morality of Christianity. I do think we could make the argument, and it's wrong, but I think you could make a good argument that like, but without the golden rule, where would we be as a species? I don't think we can say, but without do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk, where would we be as a species? This is not our second best argument. These are not the basis of our judicial system. These are not the laws that will help or are relevant to any schoolhouse. They're not even relevant to your house of worship. So if you don't know them and your church doesn't follow them, then let's stop pointing the world to them as if they represent the best of what we can provide. The 10 Commandments are a fun story, especially that part where Aaron says, why don't we just put the gold in and a calf came out? But the 10 Commandments are not your friend. And if you want to use them, at least memorize them first. At least that's the way that I currently see it. Trollbot, would you like to weigh in here?
Congratulations. You must feel really proud, finally proving something definitely, that you can neither read nor count. You think you're so much smarter than the biblical scholars who have no problem with these passages. You should just keep reading and keep your opinions to yourself, as well as your poorly repressed desire to do bad things to animals. It's atheists like you who make me feel blessed to be a Christian.
All right, well, if you are a Christian and or a troll, you got to do better than that, I guess. And if you, like me, are an honest interlocutor, then let me know in the comments what you think. Either way, be honest, be kind, be well, my distant cousins. I'm rooting for you, and I think you should too.